The Elusive Pivot, Not Where You Think It Is, written by Captain John Conrad from GG Captain. Imagine steering a massive ship, its hull longer than 2 football fields. You initiate a turn, expecting it to pivot like a car, turning around a fixed point. But here's the catch: ships don't have a fixed pivot point. The point around which a ship turns, the pivot point, is a dynamic entity, constantly shifting with every knot of speed, every gust of wind, and every change in the surrounding water. The static illusion, traditional views on pivot points. Early mariners with limited understanding of hydrodynamic forces often perceived the pivot point as static, located somewhere near the vessel's midpoint. This assumption sufficed for basic maneuvers in open waters. However, as ships grew larger and ventured into confined channels, the limitations of this static view became dangerously apparent. Understanding the dynamic nature of the pivot point is not just academic, it's crucial for safe and efficient ship handling. Unmasking the dynamic pivot COLR takes center stage. To grasp the concept of a dynamic pivot point, we need to understand the Centre of Lateral Resistance, or COLR. This is a fundamental principle in ship handling and navigation. The COLR is essentially the point on the underwater portion of the ship, where all the lateral forces acting on the hull converge. It plays a crucial role in determining how a ship behaves in the water, especially when it comes to maneuvering and stability. Imagine the underwater portion of your ship's hull as a giant rudder. This rudder is constantly interacting with the water, creating resistance and affecting the ship's movement. The COLR is the focal point of this interaction. Understanding its location and behavior is key to mastering ship handling. The COLR is the point on this rudder where all the forces resisting sideways motion converge. These forces include water resistance, the ship's own momentum, and any external forces such as wind and currents. By knowing where the COLR is, a navigator can predict how the ship will respond to different conditions and maneuvers. When a ship is moving ahead, the pivot point generally sits close to this COLR. This means that the ship's movement is relatively stable and predictable. The COLR acts as a balancing point, helping to keep the ship on course. However, as soon as the rudder is used, or external forces like wind and current come into play, the location of the pivot point begins to shift. This shift can cause the ship to turn, drift, or even become unstable if not properly managed. The dynamic nature of the pivot point is what makes ship handling both challenging and fascinating. By understanding the principles behind the COLR and the factors that influence it, navigators can make more informed decisions and improve their ability to control the ship in various conditions. Whether you're dealing with calm seas or rough waters, mastering the concept of the COLR is essential for effective ship handling. Shifting forces, shifting pivots, wind, current, and shallow water. These 3 elements are the invisible hands that constantly shape and reshape the behavior of a ship at sea. Understanding their influence is crucial for any mariner. The pivot point is a chameleon, adapting to the forces acting upon the ship. It is not a fixed point, but rather a dynamic one that shifts based on the external conditions. This adaptability is what makes ship handling both an art and a science. A strong wind blowing on the beam can push the pivot point forward of the Centre of Lateral Resistance, COLR. This forward shift can make the ship more susceptible to turning forces, requiring the helmsman to counteract with precise rudder adjustments. Conversely, a following current can cause it to drift aft. This aft movement of the pivot point can make the ship sluggish in response to steering commands, necessitating more aggressive maneuvers to maintain course. In shallow waters, the pivot point tends to move towards the bow, making the ship less responsive to rudder commands. The reduced water depth increases the hydrodynamic resistance, which can significantly alter the ship's handling characteristics. This dynamic behavior explains why maneuvering in confined waterways or adverse weather conditions demands heightened awareness and precise adjustments from the ship handler. The interplay of wind, current, and shallow water requires a deep understanding of how these forces interact and influence the ship's behavior. Mastery of these elements is what separates an experienced mariner from a novice, ensuring safe and efficient navigation through the ever-changing maritime environment. A matter of perspective ties pivot points and collision avoidance. Understanding the dynamic pivot point is crucial for collision avoidance. Imagine two ships passing each other in a narrow channel. If one captain fails to account for the shifting pivot points caused by the proximity of the other vessel and the shallow water, a seemingly safe passing maneuver can quickly turn disastrous. Accurate assessment of the situation, considering all influencing factors, is paramount for safe navigation. Science of the shift. Unraveling the forces at play. The dynamic nature of the pivot point is a consequence of complex hydrodynamic interactions. When a ship moves through water, it generates a pressure wave along its hull. The rudder, by deflecting this flow, creates a difference in pressure, generating a turning force. However, this turning force is not isolated. It interacts with other forces like wind resistance on the superstructure and hydrodynamic forces on the hull, causing the pivot point to shift. Mastering the pivot, practical tips for safer maneuvering. Navigating a ship through various conditions and tight spaces requires a deep understanding of the vessel's dynamics and the external forces at play. Here are some essential tips to help you maneuver your ship more safely and effectively. 1. Respect the dynamics. Always remember, the pivot point is not fixed. The pivot point of a ship is a crucial concept in ship handling. It is the point around which the ship rotates when turning. Unlike a car, where the pivot point is generally fixed, a ship's pivot point can shift depending on various factors. Anticipate its movement based on your speed, rudder angle, wind, current, and water depth. For instance, when a ship is moving forward, the pivot point is usually located about 1/3 of the ship's length from the bow. However, this can change with speed and external conditions. Understanding this dynamic nature is key to effective maneuvering. 2. Visualize the COLR. Develop a mental picture of your ship's COLR. The Centre of Lateral Resistance, COLR, is another critical concept. It represents the point where the lateral forces acting on the hull are balanced. By visualizing the COLR, you can better predict how your ship will respond to rudder inputs and external forces. This will help you visualize the approximate location of the pivot point and its potential shifts. Knowing the COLR and its relationship with the pivot point allows you to anticipate the ship's behavior more accurately, especially in challenging conditions. 3. Slow and steady. Reduce speed and use smaller rudder angles, especially in confined waters. When navigating through narrow channels or harbors, reducing speed gives you more control over the ship. Smaller rudder angles prevent abrupt changes in direction, making the ship's movement more predictable and manageable. This gives you more time to react to the ship's movement and adjust accordingly. In tight quarters, every second counts. Slower speeds and gentle rudder adjustments provide the necessary time to make corrections and avoid collisions or groundings. 4. Factor in external forces. Always consider the impact of wind and current on your pivot point. External forces like wind and current can significantly affect your ship's maneuverability. A strong beam wind, for example, can push the ship sideways, altering its intended path. A strong beam wind can significantly alter your turning circle. Similarly, currents can either aid or hinder your maneuvering efforts. Understanding these forces and how they interact with your ship's dynamics is crucial for safe navigation. 5. Practice makes perfect. Ship handling is an art honed through experience. The more you practice, the better you understand your ship's unique characteristics and how it responds to different conditions. Regular drills and real-world experience are invaluable. Take every opportunity to practice maneuvering in different conditions to gain a deeper understanding of how your ship behaves. Whether it's docking, undocking, or navigating through challenging waters, each experience adds to your skill set, making you a more proficient and confident ship handler. The ever-changing pivot point, a dynamic dance of ship and sea. The pivot point is not a static entity marked on a naval architect's blueprint. It's a living, shifting force, a testament to the constant interaction between ship and sea. By embracing the dynamic nature of the pivot point, by understanding the forces that govern its movement, mariners can elevate their ship handling skills, ensuring safer and more efficient voyages across the globe.